Many people around Greenville and Greene County who have contributed to the history, the development, and certainly to our memories and to what's happened here. And we're fortunate enough to have these people around so that we can have them share their accountings and their memories with us. Our next person we're going to hear from is Mr. Harry Roberts. He's a local historian, a history teacher, and part of what he says actually comes from the history books and books such as this. Others, of course, the remarks that he'll be making will be coming from his family stories and stories he's heard and passed down, and some of those things he will be sharing with us right now. But one of the most interesting, I think, of course, is if you are interested in romance and dashing generals running around the countryside and raiding and that kind of thing, he is pretty much an expert on General John Morgan. General Morgan will be mentioned in his story, and we're going to hear from him now. And at one point in his story, some of the things he's talking about, they were actually substantiated by his family. So this is something that I think is going to be very interesting right now to you as it is to me. Let's listen to him now. Harry Roberts.
Well, the account of General John Hunt Morgan is certainly one of the most dramatic and probably the most romantic episode in the Civil War. If what people have told, and many people believe, was actually true, there's been nothing like it in the history of the United States. He was born in Huntsville, Alabama, was reared in Lexington, Kentucky, and turned out to be a Kentucky horseback riding a young dandy. When the war came, he organized a company of cavalry, using, of course, fine Kentucky horses, and they did a great service for the Confederate Army. He and General Forrest, Nathaniel Bedford Forrest, were the two outstanding cavalrymen in the Confederate Army. His army came into Greenville on the afternoon of September the 3rd, and they were supposed to, they had come down the day before, his main army had, and according to some reports, they had supposed to have stopped in Greenville until Morgan came down to take control, but for some reason they went on down into the Blue Springs area. Well, Morgan then came down in the afternoon of September the 3rd. He was a friend of the Williams family in the Williams mansion there. Mrs. Williams was a Confederate sympathizer, so it is thought, and a friend of Morgan, so that's where he made his headquarters. Now, the great mystery, one of the great mysteries about the war and about General Morgan has been how did the Union Army under General Gillem in Bull's Gap, how did they know that General Morgan was in Greenville? Well, to make a long story short, they didn't know it. But the theories and the romantic tales that have developed have been based around the supposed ride to Bull's Gap by Lucy Rumbo Williams, who was the wife of one of the Williams men, Joseph Williams, who had joined the Union Army, not the Confederate. But she was living there in the Williams home with Mrs. Williams, even though Joseph was in the Union Army. Well, Morgan came into Greenville that afternoon, and no sooner was he there and settled in until a terrible rainstorm arose. And this is one thing that has not been exaggerated, I'm sure, and one thing that all reports agree on, and that is that it was a terrible rainstorm, thunder and lightning, that evening and that night. Now, since Morgan and his officers, his men, were going to be at the Williams homestead for overnight. Of course, they wanted a big, fine big supper and breakfast for them. So Lucy Rumbo Williams supposedly got on her fine black horse and left the place. So the rumor developed and has persisted that she rode the horse through the terrible storm and lightning all the way to Bull's Gap to tell General Gillum that Morgan was in Greenville at the Williams home. But this, I feel sure, is definitely a mistake. You see, the Williams family owned a farm, a large farm out in the old Asheville Highway where the tobacco experiment station is, the old Williams homes out there. I think the Williams heirs still own that farm out there. Anyway, they owned a big farm out there, and Lucy, I think, rode her horse out to the farm to get produce and meat and stuff for the feed the officers, Morgan and his men. Well, after she arrived there, the storm was so bad that they convinced her that she should spend the night and not try to come back into Greenville that night, which she did. Now, one source of my information for this is Mrs. Piper. Her family was living, her grandparents were living there on the Williams farm at the time of the Civil War. And she told me that her grandparents had handed down the story that Lucy definitely came there to get produce and food, and that they convinced her that she must spend the night, and she did. So that accounts for the fact that she rode back into Greenville the next morning at about the same time that the Union soldiers came up and captured Morgan. The Union cavalry came in to Greenville just about daylight, and some Union man, and I don't know his name, I don't know whether his name's known or not, he found out that they were coming some way, and he came out and warned them. He said, you better get out of town because Morgan himself is here in the Williams house. Now, Morgan was a name to be feared at that time. He was a legendary figure. And so, but instead of their saying, well, we'll get back because we're afraid of Morgan, they said, we'll just go in and see Morgan himself. So they came on in town then, for the first time realizing that he was in town. And so, since they knew where he was, they surrounded the Williams home and captured him. And as he was trying to escape into the garden, he supposedly went down and hid under the Episcopal Church, which was in the same block there as the front gardens of the Williams home. And then some of his men decided that that was unsafe. They wouldn't have a chance to defend themselves, so they came out of there and then were running through the grapevines and the bushes and the shrubbery when a private Camel, now I forget his, Arthur Camel, in the Union Army spotted him and supposedly shot him dead right on the spot.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. We want to thank all of the gentlemen who appeared here today talking and sharing their memories of Greenville and Greene County with you and, of course, with me. I certainly enjoyed it. My name is Andy Smalls, and it's been my pleasure and privilege today to have had a part in this. We heard from Oscar Jenkins Sr. first, and then, of course, Ralph Finney, Elma Cox, and you just heard from Harry Roberts. That about closes the book on what we're doing here today in Greenville and Greene County, but it doesn't close the book on Greenville and Greene County. It's here, beautiful and vibrant, just waiting for your visit. Thank you.